what's up guys? Nate here with another episode of Hood Rat Racing Co. Today we're going to move forward on the whole Mustang restoration here. I just want to do a quick recap of some of the stuff that's happened since the last video. So, ignore the lack of front suspension right now. We'll get to that in a second. So I have the passenger side frame rail and strut tower all completed. Not as pretty as the driver's side, but it'll do just fine. The last thing, as far as rust repair in the engine bay, is fixing this. There's a little spot. See if I can zoom in. See that little spot right there? I just got to fix that, and then I can clean everything on the radiator support and coat that as well. So rust is almost complete. After that, it'll probably be like 95%, which is all that's left is the rocker patch panel that I keep mentioning. So slowly but surely, we're tackling it. We also got more of the harness loomed up here. These are the wires for the MSD box that I'll be reinstalling with the car. So I kept those separate and then tested taped everything. I think this is actually called friction tape. I could be wrong, but I like using it for harnesses and stuff. It looks clean. It doesn't leave the nasty residue like electrical tape does. So a little cleaner of an option because I'm not a big fan of plastic looming either. The mesh, I think it's like plastic, but it's like a mesh sleeve you can put over wiring. That stuff's okay, but I don't know, Testa tape just does it for me. So yeah, we got all that done. We have all our brake lines ran and routed. You can see here there is a union that I had to install. So basically, see if I can zoom in here. I apologize, I got one hand right now. So this fitting right here, actually back up. So that fitting that I was just zoomed in on, the most forward bottom fitting, is actually for the rear brakes. And then the one going into the direct rear of the proportioning valve is the right front. I actually had them backwards. So I had to shorten one line and extend the other, hence the coupler here. But it ended up working out. I don't know if I mentioned this before. This is a Amazon special, I believe it was a UTS Auto proportioning valve. It's a pretty much identical match to the factory Ford unit that you used to be able to get. They discontinued them, so you can't get a Ford one anymore. But I got this one because it's clean and nice looking and pretty. I was able to salvage the factory mounting bracket. I also put a plug up top where the brake light warning sensor would be because it never worked anyway, so I just did without it. But yeah, all the lines came out relatively clean. Would have liked to do it a little bit better, but doing it all by hand, that's what I got. And then we kind of took a chapter out of the factory book here. Don't mind the nasty looking welds. Got the line coming up between the K-member and the frame rail coming up, and then looping back for the rubber hose on the caliper. So that's a relatively easy thing. K-member is completely bolted in the car. They got the top of the K-member and the bottom of the frame rail coated, so there's a little bit of rust prevention there. Another thing to note, these little adapters here, if you have a 93 Master Cylinder, you have to get these adapters. The rear fitting is a M10 by 1 bubble flare to a 3/8 by 24 inverted, and then the forward one is a M12 by 1 bubble flare to 3/8 by 24 inverted. So I don't know why Ford decided to switch to that, but it is what it is. You can find the fittings relatively easy. I picked them up at the local parts store, so not a big deal. What else? There's something else I wanted to cover. Yeah, started getting the harness cleaned up, like I said. And now we're ripping apart the front suspension here. So I got everything pulled apart for the most part. I just have the driver's side control arm to rip off. Quick thing to note here. So I live in the Salt Belt, which isn't... Oh, almost lost it. Isn't easy on any car, even more so on an older car. So as you can see, we got the control arm out, and we didn't have to hack too much up, thank goodness. But it can be quite a pain. So the forward bolt ended up coming out really easily. Just to show you real quick, people say that Ford uses Loctite on these nuts. They don't. This is actually a Stober nut. I don't know if you can tell on camera. So it looks like the bolt is pinched. Like the hole is no longer perfectly round, it's actually oval. They do this on purpose. It's another type of locking, like a lock nut fastener. It's kind of like a Teflon lock nut, one-time use most of the time. It's really good at, you know, retaining torque and holding it, and it doesn't really back off. The issue with that is when you let it sit on a bolt for 40 years, it gets increasingly more difficult to take off. But like I said, I was able to heat up this bolt and get it out relatively easily. The rear bolt, however, was seized into the metal sleeve on the bushing here. So what I ended up being able to do, and I got really lucky with this, is I was able to shimmy this extension through the hole where the bolt was no longer, put a socket, see if it's still hot here. You basically, if you're going to do this, you have to live with the fact that you're probably going to lose these tools and you have to replace them. It is what it is. So this will forever be my long punch now. But I was able to get the backside of the bolt going in the rear glowing like red hot. And then I slid this extension in with a socket that slid over the end of the bolt. This one was actually kind of a snug fit, but it ended up working anyway. And then it holds it all centered, so you can take your BFH here and swing and beat the devil out of it. And it ended up working out, and it actually broke all that grime and rust loose inside the sleeve, and I was able to drive the bolt out with it. But it does get, you know, it can be a big hassle living in the Salt Belt trying to, you know, restore older vehicles like this, or even newer vehicles have these same issues. So something to keep in mind. I was trying not to mangle the stock control arm, so that was the best way I could do it, because I'm reusing these arms. I'm just installing new Moog, just OEM replacement ball joints, and then Prothane's polyurethane control arm bushing kit. It's just no metal shells. You just pull the rubber ones out, clean it up, press the poly ones in, and then put your sleeves in. So I'll probably end up having to get new bolts because these ones are kind of crusty and the threads got chewed up a little bit. So it is what it is. I kind of figured I was going to have to replace that anyway. But yeah, front suspension's completely off here, so we'll be doing a lot of cleaning up. I want to get the K-member completely degreased and cleaned up so I can coat that, fix the radiator support, and slowly start getting the front suspension reassembled, because if I can get the car back on the ground completely, that'll help a lot, because then I can start focusing on the motor. I can start focusing on more of the body work and, you know, trying to get this thing done in a timely manner. So getting the car back on the ground will be a big milestone for this year's, I guess, restoration and, you know, problem tackling, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. So without further ado, I know I've rambled on long enough. I'm going to try and get this control arm out. Hopefully it's a little easier, and I'll let you know what we come up with. Guys, so it is tomorrow. We did get the right or left front control arm off, so we have both control arms off now, and we can go through those. I also took the liberty of scrubbing down the K-member, getting all the old grime off of it, and then coating it. Basically, all I did was I sprayed the whole thing down in Purple Power, and then I took like a wire brush on a drill and just went through and got everything all scraped off and whatnot. This thing was pretty nasty, so it took probably like a good hour and a half or so of scrubbing, and then I finally got it all cleaned up, and I sprayed it with some brake clean, wiped it all down, did that a couple times, and then I went through and coated the whole thing, the underside and everything. So I'm gonna let that dry tonight. Our lower ball joints came in for these, which is awesome. So this will probably be a longer video because it's going to be compiled over probably the next couple weeks of just getting all the new front suspension components and getting it back on the car, and then getting the car back on the ground. So that'll be cool. Like I said, we're starting with these control arms here, so I'll get these arms cleaned up at some point, get the new ball joints pressed in, and then remove the stock bushings and show you guys how to install the Prothane kit. So these arms are kind of crusty, but I have faith we can clean them up and at least make them look presentable and functional. And then to get the old ball joints out, you don't need a press. If you're pretty good with the hammer, you can get the ball joints out. So all I did was basically, actually, I can probably show you over here. This castle nut was pretty stuck on the, there's the old castle nut. It was pretty stuck on there because the the old cotter pin was so rusted into the stud of the ball joint that it just wouldn't come out. So I basically hacked the castle nut in half, and then I zipped what was left of the nut off, and then I cut the stud itself down on the ball joint here, and then I just took a hammer and blew it out of the control arm. So, you know, you can do whatever you want to do to get those out. I just wanted to do it quick, so that's how I ended up doing it. I will say, though, if you do it that way, you do risk possibly marring and damaging the control arm. But that was the risk I took, so that's up to you. So, like I said, at some point we'll get the new ball joints pressed in, get the new bushings in. We can get the new control arms back in the car. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with the bolts, because 3 out of the 4 bolts are still good. So I can clean those up and reuse them. So I'm going to have to track down another bolt somehow. But we'll see what happens with that. So, yeah, I'll let you know when we get these cleaned up, how we go about doing it and whatnot, and we'll go from there. So as you can see, I went with the pyro method, which basically just involves torching the old bushings out. So I got the rubber hot enough that I was able to pull the metal sleeves out of them. So now I'm just waiting for the rest of the rubber to burn away. And then once everything's done and the fire's out, I can clean up and ream the holes out with like a wear wheel. And then when our Prothane kit gets here, we can go about pressing in the new bushings. All right, so basically this is our finished product for the most part. I'm still waiting for the bushings to show up. Those should be here tomorrow, so we can start getting those pressed in. Basically all I did for the arm, because these are just stock control arms, nothing really special about them. Torched the old bushings out, cleaned out the holes as best I could so we could press the new Prothane bushings in. I got both new lower ball joints pressed in, and then we just hit it with a quick coat of some VHT roll bar and chassis paint just to dress it up a little bit. Again, stock control arms, nothing crazy. So I'll take you inside and show you what we used to get to this point. So like I said, got both ball joints pressed in. If you don't have a press, you can rent them from most parts stores. So this is from AutoZone. My friend was kind enough to loan me OEM ball joint press. Here's the number so they can look it up at the store if you want to use this one. You had to sandwich it in there. Fortunately, I have an air compressor, so I was able to get all this pressed in really nice and easy, apart from how I used to have to do it. I used to have to take it to places and get stuff pressed in. But now that we have this option, it's sweet. Made quick work of everything. So yeah, these are the ball joints I used, just Moog replacements, K8259. Ordered these off Rock Auto. I think they were like 30 something a piece. New ball joints, castle nuts, boots, cotter pins. So yeah, like I said, since we got this one cleaned in, I just gotta torch the old bushings out of this one, and then we'll hit it with a wire wheel, clean it up, and go about repainting them. And then the next thing on the list, let me zoom out here, will probably be the knuckles. Get those cleaned up and painted, and get those back on as well. Still trying to figure out the control arm bolt replacement. I picked up some new bolts from Ace. These are a 5 by 5/8 by 4.5 inch bolt, but they are a really low grade bolt. As you can see, there's no lines or anything, just lettering, which tells me they're just a really low grade. I think the term is low carbon steel, so not really sure if I want to trust that for front suspension, but I don't know, we'll see. Might just order a set of bolts and call it a day so I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, so the next immediate goal will be to get the control arms done, get the knuckles painted, get those put back on the car, and once I order my caster camber plates, I can get those bolted on, get the struts bolted back on, and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll hit you guys back up when we get this other control arm cleaned up and painted. All right, so as you can see, we got the front suspension bolted back on the car. Well, some of it. So knuckles are on. They look all right. Got our ball joints all nice and neat. Got the boots covering them. Having the knuckles on made it so much easier to pop those boots on. It's ridiculous. I wish I would have known that trick years ago. But yeah, everything's good. We got the struts bolted back in. I do have them just loosely installed up top, just until some of our new parts get here. So we have caster camber plates coming, and a new rack and pinion coming. So once those parts get here, we'll talk more about, you know, why I went with those parts and blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, slowly but surely it's getting there, and it don't look too bad. The stock suspension setup has been pretty much all I've needed. Not to say that there is not room for improvement, because there definitely is. But it's worked fine for what I've been doing with the car. So we'll keep rocking this until it is no longer adequate. And then I'm possibly looking at like maybe a coilover setup or something like that. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I also need to track down a new front sway bar, because mine is in a landfill somewhere. Basically, I probably mentioned this before, how the sway bar ripped itself off on that side, and that's why I had to change that whole frame rail in the past. But because of that, I haven't had a front sway bar. So I'm hoping that with all of these parts, and then hopefully a new front sway bar, which we'll trial out, to make sure that all this stuff we just fixed can handle the force of a sway bar. You know, we'll see how it goes. So yeah, once all the new parts get here, we'll pick this video back up and we'll talk about it. All right, so our saga of rust repair and coating is finally complete. Thank goodness. I'm so over this stuff. But glad it's done, because it needed to be taken care of. So radiator support is now painted. Everything's complete. We did fix the hole in it. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but it'll do. It'll do fine. One thing to note, I took these bolts out. Didn't know what they were for. They actually hold these crash, they're like a shock absorber thing. They actually hold these into the frame rail. I took them out and lost them, so I had to get replacements. I believe these were a 5/8 by 13 bolt, and they still use the stock retaining clips. You can see this one's part of our frame rail repair here, but that's fine, it still works. And then this one was untouched and left alone. So simple enough. Just ran them down until they stopped, basically. It's all you really need. Just holds them from rattling around and whatnot. So front of the car is now solid. Coated, everything looks good. We touched up on the original buck tag for this car. I will keep it on here because it's just, I don't know, it's like an OEM old school touch. It kind of gives you a feel of what the car started as, you know what I mean? So I think it's cool. We got our hood prop rod clip painted and put back on. This is supposed to be satin black. I don't know why it came out glossy, but whatever. Did the same treatment for the bolt. And as you can see, everything just slides in from underneath and the screw holds it in place. It's not a big deal. But everything is done, thank goodness. And another piece of the puzzle showed up today, our new rack and pinion. So we'll go over here real quick. Rock Auto, $120 with the core fee, rack and pinion. Built by Triple B Industries for a 85 Ford Mustang with the 2.3 liter 4-cylinder, which is what this car is, or was. Still same suspension and braking systems and whatnot. And the Energy Suspension rack and pinion offset bushing kit. So I think this whole setup ran me about like $135. Obviously not including shipping and whatnot, but pretty cheap. And the reason I went with another power rack, even though the car has no power steering, is because these are a lot cheaper to get a hold of versus an actual manual unit. Now, it could be wrong, but I have yet to see a car like a 79 and 93 car that didn't have power steering from the factory. Assuming that they didn't, that explains why the aftermarket units are so pricey, because they never had one that came standard, so you had to engineer one from scratch, basically. But that's fine. Again, we're going with this power unit here. It should do just fine. I drove the car with the original rack with no fluid or anything in it, and aside from driving it on cold days and the rack being frozen, it was fine. So the mistake I made on the original rack here is I left these two ports open. Never put anything in them. All the fluid came out, obviously, and all the debris and gunk got in, and it drastically shortened the life of the pinion shaft in the rack. Now, we will be also stealing our modified steering shaft we made for the car. As you can see, the end that goes into the steering column is factory, but we cut off the rag joint section and put an actual U-joint section in. I believe it was like a D slot to a 36 spline universal joint. I'm pretty sure I ordered it off Amazon. And then took it to my good buddy Sasha's house, and he burned it all in for me. And it drastically helped with the feel of the steering with the car. Because the rag joint gives you a lot of slop from the factory. And it's just not ideal when you have a manual rack car or manual rack. So to help further, train of thought here, I'm sorry. To further reinforce our steering feel of our manual rack, new rack and pinion. This one has no slop. It's tight, refreshed, should be fine. So what I did this time around is I actually filled it with some fluid because it has like a little bit of fluid left over after they remanufacture it, but not enough to like keep it alive basically. So it took me about a half hour of kind of playing with the steering shaft and slowly introducing some power steering fluid into it. Now I just use Mercon trans fluid. That's what a lot of Fords use as power steering fluid. And you can do that. You can use standard power steering fluid, whatever Ford recommends from the factory. You can't really go wrong either way. But in my experience, trans fluid will work just fine. So you don't have to completely fill the rack. You just need enough in there to keep everything lubricated and cause or to prevent premature wear of the pinion shaft in the rack. So that's what we did. Now, I did kind of mess up a little bit. So you can see here, there is a Allen plug at the top of the rack. That is a 5/8 by 18, I want to say, plug. I didn't write it down when I picked it up from the hardware store. I should have. But yeah, so 5/8 plug up top. And then the plug underneath it, you can see it's kind of jerry-rigged right now, is actually slightly smaller. And silly me completely forgot that I checked that before I even went and got two of the same size plugs. So I have to take that back out and find the, correct one, and then we can cap it off for good. So that's gonna be the plan for that. I can't install the steering shaft on this until we get the dash and the steering column back in, because I have to align everything again, which is gonna be a task of its own, but that's okay. So the next thing I'm waiting on is our new caster camber plates. I'm not gonna tell you what they are yet. I'll just show you when they get here. Hopefully they work out okay. And then once that's done together, I'm gonna order the Power Stop brake kit, specifically for 79 to 86 4-cylinder V6 and V8 cars, or 87 to 93 4-cylinder cars. The difference is 10-inch brake rotors and the pads. Now, I don't know if they use the same calipers between the 4Ride cars and the Aeronauts cars for the 10-inch rotor style brakes. Could be wrong, but it's going to work fine for me. So 10-inch drilled and slotted rotors, carbon ceramic pads. We'll give the calipers a good cleanup, paint them and whatnot. New wheel bearings and seals, so everything will be fresh. And we're also going to get new tie rod ends. Now, originally I wanted to get a bump steer kit for this car, but I don't think I'm going to go that route after all, because bump steer kits are kind of more like I would say, like a dedicated track car kind of thing, whether you're doing drag, drift, road course, whatever your poison is. It's definitely, I would say it's better suited for that kind of driving, but for an everyday driver, just, spends most of its time just cruising around, I think the standard tie rod end would be more ideal. And the reason I say that is because of wear. Bump steer kits are mainly hind joints, and they're not sealed. They're always exposed to the elements, whereas a stock tie rod end is sealed, it's greased, you can grease it and service it, and it seems like they just last longer from the homework I've been doing. So that's probably what we'll do, just for ease of simplicity. So stock tie rod ends. The car does have bump steer, but it's never been absolutely horrible. Like, the car doesn't change lanes on you. It'll just kind of pull real quick a little bit. But, I mean, I got my hand on the wheels, so it's never been an issue. So I know that the offset rack bushings will help to mitigate that, but it will still be present, which is fine. It is what it is. So once we get that stuff done, we'll basically be able to throw the front wheels on. Also get the brakes bled to confirm everything works and nothing leaks. And we can get the car on the ground and start tearing into the motor for this thing, which we'll get into in a future episode. But another thing I want to do is I'd like to replace the front springs because these are the original LX 4-cylinder springs. They're just cut to lower the car, but they're just crusty looking and not that great. But I want to wait till the car is relatively close to being done because we know how this car sat with these springs. So I want to use these as like a controlled reference to see what changes have been made since all the repairs and everything. So we can make sure the front of the car sits level. We know what the ride height will basically look like. And if we have to make any changes, we can do so accordingly. If we need a taller spring or we can get away with a lower spring, it's not a big deal. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But the other thing too is I'd like to find a front sway bar for it. So that'll be new sway bar, new bushings, new end links. So that'll be cool to have a front sway bar on this car. It definitely handle a lot better than it has. I haven't had a sway bar on this car since like, I don't know, the first 6 months I had it. Like that's how quickly that it just destroyed that frame rail and ripped itself off. And then I pitched it because I couldn't put it anywhere. But it is what it is. So yeah, once the caster camera plates get in here, we'll talk about those and get those put on the car, and we'll continue moving forward. All right, so our caster camera plates came in today, which is awesome. So as you can see, we went with Max Speeding Rods caster camera plates. They're only $55 for the pair, so super easy on the wallet. And here is our stock strut mount for comparison. So as you can see, you have way more adjustability with the aftermarket piece versus the stock one. And let me tell you why. So on the stock one, you can see we got this one installed here. I'll get to that in a second. With the stock strut mount, you only have your factory adjustments here. This whole stationary, these ones are slotted. So you have very minimal caster and camber adjustments. So to combat that, you get way more adjustability with this because you can go full camber in, full caster back, or positive caster and zero camber, however you want to set it up. Couple little things to note with the Max Speeding Rods unit. A lot of people give them a lot of hate, but I'm willing to try anything once, so we'll see how these boys work out. They seem to be decent pieces. I don't see anything that would be too much of a concern, but I do have some things that I've noticed. First things first, we have a little bit of damage here. I don't know if it was during shipping or what, but for $55, I mean, it is what it is. I'm not going to gripe about it. The other thing, this is like more of a design thing. Most caster camera plates I've seen in the aftermarket world are bottom loaded. They put the heim joints into the bottom and then use a snap ring to hold everything in place. These are top loaded and they use this like set screw to hold everything together. And these are tight. I did check that. So just me being OCD. But yeah, top loaded with a set screw. So it'll be interesting to see if this actually holds up over time. And I have faith in it. I mean, for $55, if it ends up being garbage, we'll just replace it. But I think they'll be fine. It does come with these spacers here. So just for reference, this will be your large boy, your medium boy, and your small boy. So we'll get into that when we start installing this one on the car because I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So I think that was the only real design thing that I was slightly not concerned with, but I was just like, interesting. So as you can see, like I said, we got this one installed. So how you install it, because they don't really give you instructions, is you put your bottom plate in, and see, you might be able to see it here. I don't know. But you see that like washer thingy that sits on the bottom of the strut and that holds your dust boot here. So basically, you put your small boy on the strut first, and then the big boy with the taper in it, because that holds it centered into the heim joint. And then you put your medium boy on top with your nut. And that sets the correct, or what I'm assuming is correct, height for everything. And you still have your full strut travel, which will be fine. It'll work out. And then I went for the alignment part, I went full camber in. So bottom plate in, top plate in, and then caster all the way back. So the car is going to need an alignment once it's done, obviously, because we're changing all these different parts out. But, you know, it'll definitely be correctable, or closer to more correctable than the stock counterpart. And as you can see, the profile of it is pretty small. Let's see if I can show you. So it does clear like the hood area and whatnot. And if it doesn't, a hammer will make it, so should be fine. But yeah, pretty simple, straightforward install. So I'll probably set up the tripod and show you guys how to install the passenger side. So now we're gonna install the caster camera plate onto this side. So I got everything taken apart. It's all just hand tight, loosely assembled. So you take your bottom bracket here, slide her up from underneath, position it wherever, it really doesn't matter at this point. Take your 3 spacers that'll be between this and your actual caster camera plate, all right? Take your piece. You can interchange these with either side, but at the end of the day, you'll have one facing in, one facing out, which is kind of the way it is. So no worries though, we'll make it work. So we'll just start at full max camber, full max caster here. Then you take your washers, have them Johns on, and then you take your retaining nuts and run those down. So, like I said, this won't be the final resting place for this, but for the time being it will be until we can get the car aligned when it's all done. So we'll just put it at the extremes and then adjust it accordingly. So pretty easy, not a big deal. This still moves around, whatever. So then I talked about how you have your 3 spacers, like so. So you're gonna take the smallest one and the biggest one, set the other one to the side. You won't be able to see this, but all I'm doing is sliding these onto the shaft of the strut. Now, come down. We're gonna get the strut to go through the caster camera plate now. I have to loosen this up just so I can play with it, get everything to sit correctly. And then, come on. Might have to jack it up. I do have a jack under the lower control arm here, just to help with the install. So, as you can see, the shaft is now coming through. And you basically just want to make sure that that sleeve that sits inside of this actually ends up inside of the heim joint, because it needs to be centered, if that makes sense. Come on. So the strut doesn't want to go up any higher. Weird. Okay. That feels like, yep, we're in now. So now it's centered. We're actually starting to jack the car up now. Okay. So it seems like this is fully seated. So we'll go back to before we drop it, let's get this nut ran down, just so it holds everything centered, you know what I mean? Let me zip that boy down real quick. This nut is a 15/16 or 24. Could be different depending on your car. Oh, it don't want to. Okay. So we'll just have to keep playing with it then. Not a big deal. So let me take a little bit of the load off. Set the car back down until the strut just barely starts. Okay. Never mind what I said. Okay. So it kind of worked. So, yeah, full max camber. Weird. Come on. It's not really cooperating right now. Okay. That might have been it. Come on. Max caster. Okay. So for whatever reason, this side doesn't want to go all the way to the extreme, but that's all right. It should be fine. Like I was saying, or I don't know if I mentioned this, but this probably isn't going to live at the max of its adjustment. It'll probably end up being moved forward a bit to correct the caster once it's aligned. So in that scenario, it should be fine. So let's get this jack back up now to make sure it's all fully seated. So we're lifting up the car now because there's no front suspension in it, or no weight on it, I should say. So let's get this cranked down. You're gonna need a 11/16 and 16 mil. Like I said, just get them. You don't have to like crazy tighten them, but just get them nice and snug. Because again, these will have to get adjusted later, so this won't be the final resting place of everything. You know, things will change, I'm sure. Didn't see that. Okay. Take your 16. I'm just going to snug up your caster. Same thing, not crazy tight, just snug. Okay, now we have some preload with the jack. Might be able to get it ran down now. Everything still looks good. Yeah, everything's centered. So. All right, so both caster camber plates are installed. So pretty straightforward, easy install. So as you can see here, like I was saying, you can orient them like however you want, but you'll have them basically flipped no matter what at the end of the day. As you can see, these are like a mirrored version of each other. It's kind of weird, but again, simple enough. They look nice, so should work fine. What I'm hoping for anyway. So the last thing I'll probably end up doing in this video is throwing the front bumper reinforcement back on. I do still need to paint it. I do have the back side of it painted so that we can reinstall it with all the hardware and everything, and then basically all I got to do is coat the rest of it, which we'll probably do tonight. So let me get this thrown back on here. And so the bumper reinforcement is back on. As you can see, it's just 3 14mm bolts. Make sure your speed clips are on the reinforcement when you put it on. Pretty quick and easy to throw it back on, not a big deal. We did start giving it its first coat of paint, but the brush I had ended up breaking, so I'll have to go get it more tomorrow and keep on with this. So this will probably be the end of this video. We did get a lot of stuff done. All the rust repair is finally done, and we're starting to get some suspension stuff back in here, which is awesome. So I know this is a slower and more tedious, series, but, I want to make sure I cover all the little stuff that not a lot of people do. I want to be as informative as I can, and hopefully I'm doing a decent enough job of that for you guys. And I appreciate you guys that, are giving your support and have been tuning in and, sticking with the whole process here. So your support is appreciated. But yeah, so in the next video, hopefully we'll get some more suspension parts to put on. We can get this car back on the ground, and we can start tearing into the motor, which will be exciting. So hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, comment, anything you guys might want to see in the future. And catch y'all later. Peace.